Who are the best Native American authors? And today, I'm not going to be tiptoeing around and saying, art is subjective. I like this author, but you may not feel that way. No, I'm going to be talking about the authors with real, objective, literary merit. And we can argue on who is the best, but all of us with the brain can acknowledge once you read these authors that they deserve to be called great. And after I talk deeply about each and every author and their positive and negative qualities, I will rank them on the big board, everyone. So stay tuned for that. And here on Right Conscious, I talk about the best books and authors of all time. I also help authors activate so that we can kick off a literary renaissance. And so, speaking of a literary renaissance, we got to mention one of the Southwestern goats, Leslie Marmon Silko, who is residing in Tucson, where we are broadcasting live right now. And Leslie is the author of Ceremony, which is a masterpiece of a novel. And it's considered one of the big five pieces of Native American fiction. And they are called the Big Five because many Native American literature journals, sometimes for years at a time, ban any submissions on the Big Five. I'll get to the other four later. But Silko is a beautiful author first and foremost because she has a connection with the land. She knows how to write landscapes. She understands that setting can manifest into a character. Much like Cormac McCarthy, the Southwest makes that possible to do because it's an invisible landscape. When you're in the forest, there's always something going on. But out in the desert, there is an extreme climate, and you get to sit and actually experience silence and see. It's a very mystical place, and Silko knows how to do that. She is also a trained author. She did go through the University of New Mexico literature program, which has actually produced a ton of great authors and a lot of really great Native American authors. But Silko really, like, this is why I like her. She taps into this idea that mythology isn't necessarily dead. For instance, she has a great short story named Yellow Woman, and it's about a modern woman who is what one could say either kidnapped or goes along with this man, and it's very similar to the Coyote Yellow Woman stories of old. And throughout the story, though, the character's asking, like, am I really Yellow Woman? And it's kind of a hard concept to wrap your brain around. I'm a high school teacher, and I teach a mythology class, and I spend so much time trying to, like, talk about this, but I'm like, mythology doesn't just die. The archetypes, the stories, all carry with us, but it's up to us to recognize it. But we no longer have, in our suburban sprawl, in our mass psychosis, the ability to see a lot of it. We don't see when we're living these legends. And because we're so disconnected from our culture and every other culture, it's really hard to see a lot of this. And as literary people, I think that's one of the advantages that we have is that I can compare myself, and others that I know to reference that I see in books. I'm like, damn, that guy's really like Judge Holden, JK. But I actually know people like Judge Holden. I went through like this really bad string of neighbors. I had these two neighbors that were overly social, overly racist, and you can't escape them because they're your neighbor. One time when I was really broke, I asked this neighbor to drive me to the mechanic shop to get my car because Uber didn't exist. And so he rode a Harley Davidson motorcycle. And so we get on the back and he says, "Hey, I have to go run a quick errand." And I'm like, I should have just got off the bike, like just hopped off. So we go 120 miles per hour. And this is the first time I've ever been on a motorcycle. I think I'm like 20 years old. 120 miles an hour on the highway, 45 minutes up here to Indian Springs, north of Las Vegas, to a morphine lab where he buys some morphine. And because it's getting dark, I'm like, I don't know if I want to be in Indian Springs right now. So I get back on the bike with them. And then he drops me off at the mechanic shop. Anyway, the truth about stories is that it's all we are. And that's a quote from Thomas King, who we'll probably talk about later, another Native American author. But Silko does a beautiful job of bringing Laguna Pueblo myths into modern consciousness. And so my recommendation with Silko is to read Ceremony first, then probably read some of her short stories like Yellow Woman and a couple others. Then when you're ready, read her kind of more postmodernist, more sprawling, ranting, fragmented novel, Almanac of the Dead. If you are into immigration, let's say, like if you are more on the left side of the aisle and are pro immigration and you are horrified at what's going on right now, or you're not and you want to learn more, or you don't care, this is a great book that really kind of doesn't really harp on immigration at all. I wouldn't call it an immigration novel, but it has a lot of commentary on the borderlands. And so there you go. The last thing I want to say about Leslie Marmon Silko, and I've always wanted to tell this story, is that on this channel, I have over 200 videos on Cormac McCarthy. And in 1981, Cormac McCarthy and Leslie Marmon Silko got the MacArthur Fellowship, the first one ever. And in today's money, it's like receiving $1 million, which is a huge deal. Cormac McCarthy at that time was dead broke. He had divorced 2 wives because he was so broke and was living in motels and apartments and taking underage girls across the border in Tucson. And he gets $1 million. And they flew out all the people that got the award. And it was mostly scientists and a couple writers. And they flew him out to this mansion. And he tells this story in one of his interviews. And the first night they get there, they say, come down at 5 o'clock for dinner. And McCarthy was saying that the writers thought there was going to be like a show, that there was going to be some entertainment or some jokes or something like that. But then they got down there and everyone was just not really eating and talking about physics, because inside this room, for maybe one of the first times ever, all these great scientists and philosophers were able to chum it up. There were Nobel Prize winners in there. And so McCarthy said that the other writers, and he didn't mention Silko by name, but there were only 2 others, didn't know what to do the entire time while they were there. And this was over the course of days, because McCarthy is very interested in science. So he just went and talked to all these people. So there is a fun anecdote. So Leslie Marmon Silko is GOAT. I won't say GOAT status, but she is very much a high quality writer. Next, of course, we got Sherman Alexie, and they canceled Sherman. I remember when all that was going down in my English department, they're like, we're never teaching him again. I was like, you guys are such pansies, man. And Alexie is really good because he is one of the best and one of the first who really brought authenticity and cultural insight into the lives of Native Americans that weren't maybe some of these more tragic figures. Like, for instance, in Leslie Marmon Silko's Ceremony, we have this World War II veteran named Tayo, who's trying to deal with PTSD and the old rituals aren't working. So he has to find his own new medicine. And like, that's great. And in many of the other stories and famous Native American novels, it's kind of a similar thing, tragic characters. And Alexie isn't scared to have tragic characters, but he's also not scared to have characters talk about masturbation or write beautiful short stories like are in The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fistfight in Heaven, where a displaced Indian who lives in Seattle just goes to a 7-Eleven and we hear him just like raging out for a little bit. It like really kind of brings into perspective what life is like off of the reservation and what maybe dealing with being a mixed blood Indian is like, and and that loss of identity and how you deal with the generational trauma and the alcoholism and so much more. And in recent years, with many of the more new wave authors, they've kind of polished this up. But from what I know, excuse me, why I think Alexie is great, because behind me over here is There by Tommy Orange. And Orange is more of a recent Native American phenom in terms of writing. And even though I love that book, I would say that the authenticity is there, but the rawness, the edge isn't there. And a lot of these authors that have been raised in the MFA factories and are politically correct, and they can tell jokes and be crazy, but they don't go over the line. They haven't been able to dethrone Alexie yet, because to do that, you have to walk through the fire. I used to go to a running camp in Pine Top, Arizona. I think it was called, I don't even remember what it was called. But I spent 6 weeks of my life there. And every single year, the Hopi Indian running team, Hopi High School and Tuba City and other schools on the various reservations throughout Arizona would come. And guess what? They were just like the rest of us. They were telling the worst jokes that you could imagine. Racist jokes, sexist jokes. yada, yada, yada. I mean, I have stuff I could say right now that's just so funny, but I won't get into it. But when you're on the pipeline of, going to the work, teaching workshops and becoming a professor, you can't tell those types of jokes. You can't do that. Alexie did do that. So that's one reason why he's great. Alexie is also interesting because I don't consider him like a stylist. Like, some of the other authors we'll be talking about today, like Silko is a good example. They have this ability to have like this very elevated prose. And maybe how I've been talking about Alexie's humor, it makes him seem like, he's just this, half-wit dude who doesn't know how to write and he's just cracking jokes at the expense of others. But that is not the case. And one thing that I've found that Alexie does very well, and it's actually somewhat surprising, is that he weaves mythological elements and surreal elements into his novels and into his stories. Like I'm thinking of his novel right now, Reservation Blues, in an almost seamless way. Because when you start diving into surrealism or maybe a little bit more of postmodernism, you get to a point where it might become a little bit too convoluted, and then you're asking the reader to have to sit back and really read your work. And you're going to lose a lot of people in that way. When you do that. When you start writing Gravity's Rainbow or Infinite Jest or, House of Leaves or whatever. And so Alexie kind of toes that line and writes accessible novels that most people who have, that are into somewhat literary things can read. But he also has a sneaky way of pushing you and what really makes it work is that a lot of the time in his work, he has this stark contrast with the boots on the ground reality of being indigenous in America, So shout out to Sherman Alexie for everything that he's done for me, done for my students. I've read The Diary of a Part-Time Indian with a bunch of my classes. I've read with my mythology class a lot of his short stories and some of his more wacky ones. I always get parental permission slips signed because I don't want someone to freak out. And so, moving on. So I want to take a quick 1-minute interlude to talk about Lewis Owens. I don't think probably any of you guys have read him before. I mean, some savants I'm sure have. But Owens died in 2002 from suicide. He was very influential in the movement. I've known authors who took his classes. They say he was a great professor, a great thinker, very helpful person. A lot of his books on Goodreads have less than 300 reviews. And so I've read a couple of them. I think that he's great. I think that his book, Mixed Blood Messages, is one of the better book talking about, Native Americans who are mixed blood. And so there you go. Shout out Lewis Owens, man. Another tragic case of an author dying by suicide. So next, we have Louise Erdrich. And I think that Erdrich is one of the strongest living Native American authors for sure, who's still active. One of my favorite books, for sure, top 25 of all time is Love Medicine. It is, I'll just say right now, everyone should go and buy this book. If you have not read Love Medicine, it is a must read for Native American fiction. And what the good part is it's a part of kind of a loose series with you don't need to read in order, but it's in a universe with other books, which is really fun. And Love Medicine is almost a combination of everything I've been talking about. It has the mythological element. It has the raw authenticity and the jokes. It has the beautiful nature. It has spirituality in it. It has nihilism, alcoholism, what's really happening at reservations, what really happens to people when they leave the reservation, what happens when corporations start to create simulacra of Indians. Like it's a really all-encompassing novel that I think is a really great introduction to Native American fiction. It is one of the big five that I was speaking about earlier. And this novel is like accounting for 3 different generations of 2 different families and, their relationships, good and bad, and spectacular stuff, you guys. Like, really. This is, if I was this good as an author, like if I could write fiction like this, I'd be so happy. Like, I'd be like, praise the Lord, Man, so let's get into the weeds now. There's something that Erdrich does that is somewhat hard to do. Speaking of mixed bloods and living in this world, I live 30 minutes away from the border here, here in Arizona, and I'm a teacher, as I mentioned before, and many of my students are Catholic, and many are shifting away, obviously, from Catholicism because they are young and they are questioning things, and I like showing them books and stories that really tries to contemplate with grace the sacred and the ordinary and the division and like these types of things, because my students who some of them are Indian, some of them are Mexicans, and what's the difference between someone who's from Sonora and Chihuahua and, Indians in southern Arizona and southern Texas and southern New Mexico? Nothing most of the time. There's just a border, and one group's called Mexicans and the other one is called Indians. But they all have pagan roots. And it's been really fun for me to try and talk and have discussions and kind of contemplate that divide and ask how they relate to it, because I've also taught in a much more Protestant white school where kids weren't superstitious. Kids didn't have, most of the kids were Mormon or Protestant or just, didn't go to school at all, but were just kind of raised in the most vanilla cookie cutter type of way. And so that is a stark contrast to more of a superstitious Christianity, a Christianity, at least in this region, that accepts some more occult elements. And a novel that I think does this well, this is a good one apt to read after Love Medicine, is Tracks, one of Louise's better books. I remember reading this in Hawaii. Good times. Another thing I like about Louise is that she is a poet, that she writes poetry. She started as a poet, and that enables, I really like, and a lot of writers are this way, honestly. A lot of writers, Faulkner, Cormac McCarthy, and others, and me, like, you start as a poet and you get really into poetry and then you transition out. But with poetry, you really learn to focus on the sentence. You really learn the importance of that because that's all you have. If you have this, you're trying to get this image down in 13 lines because you don't want it to be way too long, then you have to figure out how to make it happen. And so she has that on the page, sentence by sentence tenacity, which is wonderful. She also with her kind of cosmology. So with all these different books that are in the same universe, it enables her to escape a trap that I see some books fall into. And this is the case for all books, where in Native American fiction, the reservation becomes like this symbol. And this is much more apparent in older stories or stories not written by natives or people with experience. But it's when the symbol is just kind of the reservation is used as a symbol of tragedy, despair, a vanishing culture, and it's used to show poverty and addiction and hopelessness. But it really doesn't dive deeper than that. And all you have to do is show it. You just have to show the reservation and things being torn down, and everyone gets it. They're like, yes. And so Louise kind of changes this and really transcends a lot of that because she has this world she's created that she can add, that's now millions of words. And within that, you have community bonds, like you have familial ties, you have like all the typical symbol stuff of like historical trauma. But within that historical trauma, there's humor and resilience and inside jokes. And then there's all the political stuff that's going on and the political kind of dramas that are always unfolding. And all of that kind of helps you kind of get a more inside look and lose yourself in it. And obviously it's a fictional world, but it's almost like watching like The Wire. I absolutely love The Wire about Baltimore, and you really get to kind of see how the city runs and get to see, Baltimore isn't just this violent place and that just sucks. One of my favorite Baltimore stories, one time I was in Baltimore, I got stuck there overnight. And so I go stay at some shitty hotel, and the guy that's checking me in, it's like 1 a.m. and I'm checking in. I'm like, my flight leaves the next day at 3 p.m. And I ask him like, hey man, like what should I do around here? What can I do tomorrow? And he looks at me and says, don't get fucking shot. And that's it. No laugh. Like, really? And you know me, you guys. I was like, what happened? Why would you say that? And all he said to me is, you'll fucking die. I need to get out of here. I'm like, oh my God. But good art, shows like The Wire that have, 50 plus hours of content can really show you a deeper look at the city. And I think Louise does something very similar. So moving on, next we have one of the more famous Native American authors. I think the only Native to win the Pulitzer Prize until Louise Erdrich did. I forgot to mention that in 2021 with their great novel, The Night Watchman. But for a long time, and when I was in school, that was always like a big deal. Like, natives had been kind of looked over in their fiction. Momaday is kind of an interesting guy. I personally like his poetry better than his fiction. His novel, 1969 novel, Housemaid of Dawn, won the Pulitzer Prize. And it is a piece for its time, I could say. It's postmodern, it's jarring, it's fragmented, it requires close study, and when you do, it is a good novel. I don't know if I would sit and recommend it to you guys. It is one of the big five that I was talking about earlier. I feel like it's another novel about a World War II veteran. I feel like Ceremony accomplishes the same idea, like showing like the negative aspects of natives going to war a lot better. But I like when Momaday breaks out of just writing pure fiction and he does more. He has a couple of hybrid books. There's a great one by titled "The Way to Rainy Mountain." I gave this one actually to my sister Victoria. I should probably get another copy at some point. And another titled "In the Bear's House," and they are really meditations on Kiowan myths and the journey. Like, for instance, The Way to Rainy Mountain is like talks about the journey of the Kiowa people and how they were forced to go there in Oklahoma. And so, as I was talking about earlier, this is like kind of this is like the blueprint of the living mythology that Leslie Marmon Silko and Louise, Tommy Orange, Joy Harjo, like what they are doing now, it all started with this book. And so, shout out to the OG, N. Scott Momaday. Go check out his work. Like I said, this is the one I would get. So next we have Winter and Blood by James Welch, which is also book number 4, a part in the big 5 that I've been talking about. And Welch is an interesting author because Winter and the Blood was his debut novel, and I've only read Fool's Crow, which is another of his novels, but it wasn't as good. And I've heard that, and maybe I'm wrong about this, maybe someone down below who's read him can kind of clarify more, that he had never wrote anything necessarily better than this. And this is another one of these kind of fragmented novels, very similar to Ceremony and Housemaid of Dawn, of this Native American character who is displaced, and you kind of just get taken on this journey. And I would say it's better than a Housemaid of Dawn, not as good as Ceremony. And yeah, there you go. So next on our list is Tommy Orange, who wrote There, which is behind me. And then last year he released Wandering Stars, which I didn't like as much. I will say I did meet Tommy in person at some event that nobody was at. It was like the Las Vegas Valley Book Festival or something, some event. And for whatever reason, it wasn't that busy, and I was the only person in line at that time. I think he was sitting there for like an hour or two. So I sat and talked to him for 5 or 6 minutes. Was a cool guy. We talked about the hyphy movement in San Francisco and people like Mac Dre and Andre Nicotina, I think his name is. I obviously know who Andre Nicotina is. I just don't know if that's how you say his name. Kill a whale, everybody. But cool guy. But I have to be honest here, you guys. I am a straight shooter. I don't feel like Tommy Orange has transcended or followed or stood on the shoulders of Sherman Alexie, Leslie Marmon Silko, Louise Erdrich, and others that I've talked about. And he's doing a lot of things really well. He knows how to tell a story. Like in there's like a lot of these loose threads that all come together, and it's like a really beautiful thing, and it's high level writing. But I also feel like that it factor isn't there yet. He's still a young guy. Actually, don't think he's a young guy. For some reason, I thought he was like 33. He looks pretty young, but he's actually 43 now. But nonetheless, many authors write their best works in their 40s and 50s, and I could see him moving and stepping into that. But I also feel like a lot of his success is because there aren't many young Native American authors yet who have filled the gap with some of the authors I've talked about and I will be talking about in the rest of this video. And so, much like Roberto Bolaño's 2666, I feel like There and Wandering Stars are almost sadly have been elevated beyond maybe what they should have, which creates, I think, internal pressure on the author because it is a diversity selection. Hate to say it, but knowing how publishing companies work and knowing about diversity quotas and not looking for merit and also profit maximization, and we could get into the history of publishing companies. They have people out there that they elevate, that they push, and Tommy was one of them, and he deserves it. I mean, honestly, I read his books, was captivated by them, went through them. I will say that he's a great author, but I don't know if he has that it factor yet. Next on our list is Gerald Vizenor, who is also a part of the Big Five. And Vizenor's best book, in my opinion, is Bearheart, which I would say is kind of the postmodernist classic of the Native American literature scene. It's a post-apocalyptic tale of a bunch of natives who are trying to get a better life. I mean, it's less like Cormac McCarthy's The Road and more like Charles Johnson's The Middle Passage. But but then it also has this schizophrenic Gravity's Rainbow style, and then also has a Blood Meridian style, or excuse me, Blood Meridian level of violence. And so that's kind of a big description. It's kind of an odd book. It's not successful at all times, unfortunately. And it's kind of a very good and very like sneaky critique of the American invention of the Indian. And obviously, that's a common theme throughout many of these many other works. And I kind of view Bearheart in line with Sherman Alexie, but Sherman Alexie has a couple post-apocalyptic stories. One is named Distances. It's in The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fistfight in Heaven. I would recommend everybody go check out Distances. And it's where all non-natives have been wiped out by a virus and it's only natives left in the world. So I would go read that first and go check out that entire collection. And if you're into that, then this is kind of an expansion on that. And funny enough, these were written at around the same time, the early 1990s. And I really love that period of writing because many of those authors were raised in a world with technology. They had the television, but if they were raised on the reservation or out in rural areas, they were able to tap into nature and, have a good education though, and really bring that to the table. As today we have all these MFA factory authors who have lived comfortable lives in their little suburban boxes and don't have any real life experiences to bring to the table. And when they do have these experiences, they're the fabricated insanity of our modern era, doing LSD and having psychosis and all these other things. Many of these older authors move through a lot of that. It's kind of a wild thing to think about that many of these older authors, none of, they maybe had anxiety or like these things, but they didn't allow a lot of the stuff that keeps us down to hold them back. And a lot of their experiences were more authentic. So next on our list is Joy Harjo, who was the 23rd United States Poet Laureate. I think that Harjo has some good stuff, but I think in comparison to many of the greats of poetry, she doesn't really stand with them, and the United States Poet Laureate and the Nobel Prize and many of these awards are in actuality political awards. People like Cormac McCarthy never won the award. Thomas Pynchon, Don DeLillo. I could go on and on. People who don't necessarily align with the political ideology of the very leftists, I'll just say it. I'm independent of the right also and all of the BS, but the very left Nobel Prize Committee and Pulitzer Prize Committee and the National Book Award Committee. But nonetheless, I've read multiple of Harjo's books, and she is a good poet. I will give her my credit. But my favorite Native American poet by far is John Trudell. His poems on paper aren't wonderful, but he showed me the power of what music and poetry can do together and spoken word. And it's amazing, his tribal voices, AKA Graffiti Man. I got the vinyl of that. They're absolutely wonderful albums, groundbreaking for me, really changed my life. Even long before I read any of these books, I got exposed to him when I was 19 by a professor, this really crazy professor. At the end of the semester, she asked, "What grade do you think you deserve?" And everyone said A, obviously. And I remember I was just wigging out back then, just daily stoner, weekly psychedelic user. And I don't know if I did anything, but I got an A. And I got shown John Trudell, so that was awesome. Later on, I'll rank some of the other common Native American poets that we hear about, but I'm not going to mention them because I'm not that big a fan. Speaking of poets, Linda Hogan, I think, is very good. I think that she is a big step up of a lot of people. So the time has now come. Let's start doing some tier rankings and having some fun. All right, we are here. We are live in the boardroom. Let's go, everybody. So here we go. I want to explain now how I'm going to rank this list. This list is going to be ranked in regards to the best literary fiction or poetry ever written. I'm not going to compare them against each other. I'm going to compare them against the greats. And so it might be a little bit rough. Maybe people will say, "You're a racist," but this. I think that anyone who's read their works and read the people behind me would maybe agree. So first we have Thomas King up to plate. I didn't really talk about Thomas King, but he wrote a very good nonfiction book that I think is a great book to get into Native American studies with, titled The Truth About Stories, which is awesome. He has another one I like named Green Grass Running Water. And so I'm going to, and I like Thomas King. And so when I give these rankings, you guys, like I said, this is no harm, no foul. I mean, I'll tell you the people who I don't like here, but I'm going to throw Thomas up here at a C, which is, there's a lot of good books that I've put in at a C before. Next, we have Leslie Marmon Silko. And Leslie, I feel like, would maybe be able to get into the A category, but the problem is that her output across her career hasn't been very high. And I think that it's a thing. So I'm going to throw her down here at a B, because if you have a 50-year career, then I want to maybe see more than a couple novels out of you, because being prolific is also a part of, being on this list, As I was saying, I think earlier in this video, and no, not in this video, another video, Dostoevsky, most authors write at least 10 novels and probably fall more near toward 15 novels. And so when someone falls under 5 and they're not, like something, like Ceremony's great, the Almanac of the Dead is great, but if she had 3 or 4 more, she'd be heading toward the A category. Next, we have N. Scott Momaday. And Momaday, I didn't even talk about, writes some good poems. I really like some of his poems. His memoir is good. And so I'm going to throw him here in the B category. Without him, no one else on this list would have gotten as far as they did. He is an innovator, and that's not just it. Because sometimes when I hear people say that, it's like very disrespectful. It's like, oh, he's an innovator, but that's all he did. He was, and people kind of act like that doesn't mean you're as good. He is as good as a lot of the authors on this list, even though he preceded many of them. Next, we have Louise Owens. I really like Louise Owens, but his novels do struggle a lot of the time. I think that's why they didn't break through. I think a good editor could have helped him. So I'm going to throw Louis down here at a D, even though he really did change my life. I think his novel, I think Bone Game and The Sharpest Sight and some others, I enjoyed them personally, but I back then I was reading 200 books a year, and I'm actually pretty book positive. I only read books I know I'm going to like and that I'm interested in and that are going to be a referent for me. And so I choose wisely. And so I'm sorry, Louis. It pains me to do this. I'm very sympathetic to him. I've known, like I said, multiple people that knew him and studied under him. But, it had to be done. Next, we have Layli Long Soldier, I think her name is. She's a poet who is kind of had a big splash out with her novel Whereas, which came out, which came out in 2017, but I am not a fan. I think that she is down here in the D category for sure. Yeah, there it is. I mean, like I said, I'm comparing her to the greatest poets of all time here. So I don't think that she's standing on their shoulders or even coming close. I knew poets getting their MFA who were writing better poems. Objectively, if you showed 1,000 people who knew poems, this one and that one, and it was a blind test, most of them are picking the MFA's poems. So sorry, I screwed up there. This is actually Louise Owens right here. This is Gerald Vizenor. I'm going to throw Vizenor up here in the C category. I think that he is a little bit too convoluted. I think that Bearheart is good and some of his other work is good. I actually appreciate a lot of his secondary academic criticism and some of his works where he talks about Native Americans and stuff. That stuff's really good, but I think that he's down here in the C category for sure because there's people like Thomas Pynchon and countless other postmodernists. And like I said, even people like Cormac McCarthy and The Road, which smack his post-apocalyptic work. But nonetheless, great messages in Bearheart. Next, we have Linda Hogan. I'm going to throw Linda up here in the C category, and I'll throw Joy up here too. I think they're better than Layli Long Soldier, but I don't think they can, transcending into the B category is kind of moving toward you could be considered a legend, there are big names that are in that B category and people who are really good. And I just don't think they really broke through that wall. Next, we have John Trudell. I'm going to give John Trudell actually an A. I feel like in terms Tribal Voices, AKA Graffiti Man, I really feel like he's the Bob Dylan of his time. I really think a lot of those songs when you listen, and that's why Bob Dylan actually brought him on tour. He opened for Bob Dylan. I think that you can really have your life changed by his work, and it's impactful. And I think he was one of the stronger generational voices. Next, we have Louise Erdrich, and I'm going to throw her up here at an A also. I think that she is a strong writer. She has a big catalog. She is dedicated to the game, and I'm absolutely a huge fan of her. And I'm excited that she still has decades of life to continue writing and that she's involved in the scene. And Yeah, really, really great stuff. Next, we have Natalie Diaz, who wrote Post Confessional Love Poem, which I actually have a video on that. I actually have a video on Post Confessional Love Poem and When My Brother Was an Aztec. I feel like she has moments. She has more moments than Layli Long Soldier, in my opinion. And she was very nice to me when I met her, but I'm going to throw her down here in the D. Sherman Alexie, ooh. This one's hard. He's in the A to B category, but I'm going to throw him down here in B because I think to get up here to the A is that's tier. That's hardcore. Like if you guys watch some of my other videos, people that make it to the A list are like, you got to be good. And he's good, but like that's a reserve spot. This is one of those decisions that it could depend on the day. Next, we have Richard Van Camp, who wrote The Lesser Blessed and Beast, which I have read. I got into Van Camp very early on. I'm going to throw him in a C here. So I'm going to rank these. So I think Gerald's higher, put Linda here. And I think that Tommy Orange is also a C. I think that Richard Van Camp, in terms of the rawness and authenticity, may be better than Tommy Orange. That's just me just talking shit opinion here. But I think that, if you're a Canadian, so Richard Van Camp is a First Nation. He's from Canada, and his works take place there mostly. And he has a movie called The Lesser Blessed, a book named The Lesser Blessed that was also turned into a movie that was filmed in Sudbury. And so, yeah, I would recommend him actually in front of Tommy Orange, and I usually do. Shout out Tommy Orange too. So there it is, everybody. There is the long form explanation beforehand of what I like about these authors, what I don't like, and now here is the official right conscious Native American ranking in comparison to the great works behind me. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for all the support. Thank you for supporting these picks. If you guys want to join my book club, I think we'll eventually be reading a lot of these works. As you can maybe tell, I do care about Native American fiction and even the issues and enjoy reading it and enjoy talking about it. And so it is something that I would like to read with you guys. And so thank you guys for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.